Salutes up, family. We're going to run a marathon on this one. So get ready. Either way, there's no denying the rivalry that existed in the streets that led to bloodshed, death, and incarceration. Add the introduction of crack cocaine into the mix, then you have a dangerous combination that devastated an already fragile African American community. The introduction of crack caused the increase of addiction, deaths, and drug-related crimes. I can easily start talking about the CIA involvement in cocaine trafficking and how the drugs even got into black neighborhoods, as well as the fact that at the same time drugs were being placed into the ghettos to fund a war overseas. The United States declared war on drugs here on our turf. Again, all of this may sound conspiratorial, but according to Wikipedia, a 1986 investigation by a subcommittee of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee found that the Contra drug links included, among other connections, payments to drug traffickers by the U.S. State Department of funds authorized by the Congress for humanitarian assistance in the Contras. In some cases, after the traffickers had been indicted by federal law enforcement agencies on drug charges, in others, while traffickers were under active investigation by these same agencies. This draws a clear connection. I could also talk about how this war on drugs that seem to be placed in the ghettos by the very entities that are fighting against it. Let me say that again. Drugs that seem to be placed in the ghettos by the very entities that are fighting against it, created this narrative about African Americans that ultimately led to mass incarceration, and how that became a tool for slavery by another name thanks to the 13th Amendment. The ghetto is a trap, literally. And Nipsey will learn this early, while still a young adult. As a proud member of the Rolling 60 Crips, Nipsey was very transparent about his role in the gang life, from violence to drug dealing. It was very apparent that Nipsey really lived that life. Nipsey's mother was African American with roots that trace back to Louisiana, while his father was from a small country in Eastern Africa called Eritrea. When Nipsey was 19, he took some of the money he earned from hustling and bought a plane ticket to his father's homeland. This trip would change Nipsey's whole perspective and the trajectory of his life forever. Before the trip, he was just a young man from Los Angeles who was knee-deep in the gang culture with the hopes of beating the trap by becoming a rapper. After the trip, he became a Grammy Award-nominated musician, music executive, and activist, serial entrepreneur, marketing expert, and real estate investor who was committed to changing his community for the better. Nipsey stayed in Eritrea for 3 months, and while he was there, he made some very meaningful connections, but most importantly, he was able to, for the first time in his life, see a place where the people who were in charge were all melanated and looked like him. Ralph Waldo Emerson once said, "The mind once stretched by a new idea can never return to its original dimensions." Let me say that again. The mind once stretched by a new idea can never return to its original dimensions. LA. His mind was open to the possibilities of how things could be. At one point, South LA in the Crenshaw district was his whole world. Now the world seemed bigger. In a 2010 Complex magazine interview, Nipsey said, "If you don't know your full throttle history, the whole story of how you came to where you are, it's kind of hard to put things together. Going to entry, or retreat rather, filled in a blank spot for me as far as understanding myself." Let me say that one again. If you don't know your full throttled history, the whole story of how you came to where you are, it's kind of hard to put things together. Going to Eritrea, filled in a blank spot for me as far as understanding myself. Let's analyze this. His trip to Eritrea motivated him in ways that really nothing else could because it instilled a sense of pride and reconnection to his roots. This is an element of our culture that we have lost at no fault of our own. It was certainly strategically done. However, in Nipsey's death, we must acknowledge that it is time to relearn who we really are and recognize our genetic divinity. Later, you will see that Nipsey's mom encouraged us to go back to our roots and find our creator and spiritual power. Let me say that again. Go back to our roots and find our creator and spiritual power. She was simply referring to our true culture and the spirituality of Africa, not to be confused with religion. African spirituality simply acknowledges that African beliefs and practices touch on and inform every facet of human life. For example, sickness in the indigenous African worldview is not only an imbalance of the body, but also an imbalance in your social life, which can be linked to a breakdown in family relations, and most importantly, your relationship with the ancestors. Having a greater understanding of the power, your connection to your ancestors, the earth, and universal law is empowering and deeply embedded in African culture. I encourage you to learn more through researching the foundations of African religions such as Yoruba, Cuban Santeria, Brazilian Kidumbo, and Haitian Voodoo. With this new knowledge of self, tapping into his roots, and the idea that a community can be run by its residents, similar to many communities in Eritrea, Nipsey decided to create a long-term strategy that we now know as the marathon. The marathon. This strategy would be run with his brother, friends, family, and strategic partners. In the next 2 chapters, we will dive deep into Nipsey's strategy and give you a guide on how you can use it to run your own marathon. And with that being stated, family, keep your heads up, stay focused, and read. Peace.